Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about three literary devices, and these three literary devices are hyperbole, onomatopoeia, and puns. All right. All right. So you would see as you would see on screen, we have three images that depict the figures of speech, which will be analyzed in this lesson. What you would also notice, well, what you will notice is that these three figures of speech can be identified by a single word, right? Given what they are associated with. But we'll get into that and you'll see that as we go on. So we're going to start with hyperbole. What is hyperbole? But before we get into that, we need to understand that it is hyperbole and not hyperbole. English is not a phonetic language, so you can have words that can have some strange pronunciations, okay? So hyperbole refers to exaggerations that are used for emphasis. We all know what an exaggeration is. So whenever we employ exaggerations, we are using hyperbole. So you can think of hyperbole as just as an exaggeration. So what's the purpose of an exaggeration? Well, an exaggeration achieves two things. It can create humor and it adds emphasis. Okay? Let's say we want to emphasize a particular point, we can employ an exaggeration or hyperbole, right? So let's look at the examples. I am dying of laughter. Do you think that that literally means that the person is dying? No, it has nothing to do with that. Dying of laughter is just an expression that would be used to indicate that the individual is extremely amused at the situation or just amused in that given moment. It has nothing to do with death. So it's just an exaggeration because laughter is not going to kill you, or it shouldn't. Right. So that person is just very amused, and the expression dying of laughter is just used for emphasis. And like I said, because you know it's an exaggeration, it because the exaggeration is ridiculous, it actually might make you laugh when someone says that, right? And the second example, I watched this movie a million times. Of course, you don't literally mean a million times because you can't even count that high. You know what I mean? So a million times is just an expression that is used to emphasize how many times I have watched this movie or how often I have, I watch the movie. So just for emphasis, a million times. No way. Right? So as you see, these are very easy to identify because they involve exaggerations, right? Yes. So that would be hyperbole. Onomatopoeia. So what is onomatopoeia? Now, onomatopoeia would be another word that can be difficult to pronounce, but it will be pronounced onomatopoeia. And it will also be difficult to spell, right? Now, this is the formation of a word that sounds like the noise it describes. In fact, it emulates the sound directly. So when it comes to onomatopoeia, this is going to appeal to our sense of hearing because you're going to have a word that can directly be associated with the sound it makes, right? So what is the purpose of this? It creates auditory imagery. As I was saying, it appeals to our sense of hearing. In other words, it allows the reader or listener to imagine the sounds that will be made. Right. So if we are writing a story, what have you, and we would like the reader to be able to imagine what something would sound like, or we want to paint a picture of using songs, then we can employ onomatopoeia. That would be very effective in conveying what something would sound like, because the word is going to be so closely linked to the sound. For example, my phone rings. We know what ringing sounds like, so we can imagine what that would sound like. Rings. What rings? A bell, a phone, right? So we can imagine it. The beat buzzed. So when we hear buzz, we could, in fact, we would immediately associate that with a bee because we know bees buzz, or even a fly. So the idea behind onomatopoeia is to help the reader to be able to think about songs or imagine songs, right? So that's what it does. It appeals to our sense of hearing. And once again, it can be easily identified because it deals with sound. So when you look at a word and you can directly and you can imagine what that word would sound like, and you can even associate it with its referent, then you know you have an example of onomatopoeia. Puns. So a pun uses the words within a sentence to convey another meaning. In addition, words can sound like they mean something else. Puns are also known as wordplay. So the sole purpose of a pun is to create humor. You're going to have a word that is going to produce humor based on its ambiguity. And by ambiguity, I mean the fact that it can have more than one meaning in the context, right? So let's look at the example. You were right, so I left. So left would be the word that produces the humor here. What is that? Now, left is the past tense of leave, but left also happens to be opposite of right. So it becomes funny. You know, when we say no pun intended, right? When we say no pun intended, we mean that we've used a word that can produce humor based on the context. It could have more than one meaning based on the context, and that ambiguity can produce humor. So we say no pun intended. So I would say you were right, so I left. No pun intended. Because left is the opposite of right, and left is the past tense of leave, right? So it becomes very amusing. The second example, the other day I held the door open for a clown. I thought it was a nice gesture. Okay, no, jester is the word that produces humor. Why is that? Because jester, the word jester refers to, it is an idea that's similar to a clown, and a person who, performs for an audience by acting like a fool and, etc., etc. Similar to a clown, right? Jester, but that sounds very similar to another word, gesture. No, a gesture. No, if gesture were the word there, it would make sense because gesture would be an action, right? It would be an action. So the other day I had a door open for a clown. I thought it was a nice gesture. Remember in the definition I said that words can sound like they mean something else. So that would be an example of that. A word sounding like they mean something else. So gesture is very similar in sound to the word gesture, which also would make sense in this context, right? So you see how puns work. The ambiguity of a word, whether it is the ambiguity in the word itself having more than one meaning in the context, or if one word sounds like it means another word, and that other word actually making sense within that sentence, like you see with the second example, right? gesture is similar in sound to gesture, and gesture actually makes sense there. I thought it was a nice gesture, right? So we see how puns function. Gesture is you can say is another word for clown, but that is also very similar to the word gesture in sound. And that would be very appropriate in this context because it was an action performed on behalf of someone else. He held the person held the door open for the clown, right? So puns once again are easy. Puns are easy to identify because you have one word that will produce humor based on its ambiguity. That ambiguity could be two forms. It could be the word having two meanings in a sentence, or it could be one word sounding like it means something else. And that something else, that other meaning is actually going to fit within the context of the sentence, right? As you see with gesture. All right, so this brings us to the end of this lesson on hyperbole, onomatopoeia, and puns. I hope that it was useful. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.